Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. John Davidson, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about some of the amazing things that you're doing with the Davidson Learning Company.
I appreciate that. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for being here, bud. So where were you born?
I was born in a tiny town in the Central Valley of California called Reedley. And this is an area where the majority of the fruit in the world is grown.
Ooh.
So the geography of the area is really tiny town between, I think it was about 15,000 population when I was there. Now it's 30. But you have tiny town of, a few thousand to maybe 30,000. And then you have orchards for miles and miles and miles, whether this be peaches, plums, almonds, grapes, etc.
Awesome.
And then you have another little tiny town, and you have the Sierra Nevadas in the background. And so looking back on it now, it's a really, really beautiful place to live. But when we were kids, especially teenagers, like, why did mom and dad want to move here? And this is right between Fresno and Visalia, California.
Yeah.
And it's not a place where a lot of people have a lot of pride coming from. You're not particularly bragging being from Fresno. And in fact, if you see another person from Fresno, it's more of a, oof, you made it out too. But it was a great place to grow up, and had a lot of great skate spots, which I realized later in life after I'd moved all over the country that I was very blessed from a skateboarding perspective, that there were some great stairs and warehouses and schools to skate. So
that's cool. Did you grow up there?
Yeah, I was there. I lived in the same house until I was 20.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and coincidentally, or ironically perhaps, I went to 7 different schools during that time.
Wow.
So I went to a different school in kindergarten, different school, first grade, different school, second grade, and 2nd through 6th, I was in the same place. And then that school had a junior high, but I went to a different junior high.
Wow.
And then I went to a private high school that was across the street from my house, and it was the worst experience of all time. And then I went to the public school. So I went from a 400-person high school to a 2,000-person high school.
Wow.
And then rather than going to the community college in town, I went to one 30 minutes away. And that was before I moved to Orlando, Florida to chase my skateboarding dreams.
So question for you, why was the private high school a bad experience?
It was the most superficial people I've ever met in my life. It was this was just a tough experience, a very wealthy population. You're doing football practice before your freshman year, summer before freshman year, and everybody's talking about what kind of cars they have. Like, guys, I don't think we're driving for a couple more years. And it was just a very kind of superficial, two-faced type of a situation, which, to be fair, there's probably a lot of high school, that's part of being a teenager.
Yeah.
But one thing that really drew me to the public high school was that while people were openly and obviously flawed, they were real.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated that in people. And to this day, I really appreciate people who are who they really are.
Yeah, authenticity is a big deal.
Absolutely.
It really is. So growing up where you grew up, What was your favorite thing about growing up there?
It's a good question. Looking back, my brother and I have been best friends our whole lives, and he was really older brother plus father figure to me.
That's cool.
And I always say that we probably wouldn't be as close if I was the older brother because he's a way better person than I am. And there were some times he was probably putting up with a bratty little brother in me that I would maybe not have had as much patience for. But I mentioned the skateboarding spots, which was awesome. But after our mom had us do all of our chores until noon on Saturdays, it was really just go out and skate. And so it was a pretty safe environment. I mean, I know a lot of us nowadays, especially our parents, we look at the time we grew up compared to the obvious dangers nowadays. But it was the typical, come home when the lights go out sort of situation. But we would skateboard all over town, and there were a lot of skate spots. Like I said, when I moved to Orlando to join the skateboard company I skated for, and I moved out there about a one-way ticket, I was like, where are all the spots?
Mhm.
And
No kidding.
I quickly realized that I was very blessed with where I grew up. And so we would go all over, but different towns down to Visalia up to Fresno. But even just sticking around Reedley and Dinuba is kind of the closest town next to us. A bunch of stuff that was really fun to skate, and had a pretty solid crew of I was kind of the youngest guy, and it was all these high schoolers, and I was the junior hire, and then kind of rose as I grew in my skateboarding. But it was probably just the ability to skate all over and do it safely.
So I think you already answered this, but it's a question we ask. Who was the most influential person to you growing up?
Yeah, it was definitely my brother.
Yeah,
I
sounds
have
like it.
so much respect for him in so many different ways. And when we did everything together my whole
Yeah,
life, and have all these
that's
great
so
memories
cool.
from playing football one on one and in the backyard. And there's even this really cool photo. My great aunt, who is the greatest gift giver of all time,
Mhm.
every Christmas and birthday, it was like, what is Aunt Rosemary giving us? Because she
Mhm.
just had the greatest gifts, and she had a really interesting life herself. But she got my brother this stuffed elephant when I was born, because it's kind of like, hey, you've been the only show in town, and now there's a new kid arriving, right?
Mhm.
And there's this really cool photo of the elephant sitting next to us on the couch, unnoticed, and my brother holding me. And that was really kind of emblematic of the rest of our lives. And when skateboarding hit our radar and we started going for it, I had a kind of a knack for sports growing up, so I excelled in various traditional sports. But skateboarding was just another thing that I happened to kind of have a knack for. But my brother had the passion for it, and it's possible I may have quit skateboarding if it wasn't for him getting
Mhm.
frustrated a number of times. But after a couple of years, he said, John's really good at this, and we should start filming him. And so, not only was he older and wiser, but he had a driver's license. And so,
Ooh,
you know, we would drive all
benefit
over.
of being older.
That's right. Major, yeah, that was a major benefit. And so the fact that he would film me and drive us all over, and he was really my kind of my agent as well as my brother and biggest fan. And so he really helped me in the early days with getting sponsored for the first time. And to this day, we talk almost every single day. Now it's mostly in the form of texting hilarious memes back and forth.
Mhm.
But I'll shoot him a video or a photo of something new I've done, or he'll let me know his latest jokes. He does stand-up comedy in Portland on the
Oh,
side.
cool.
He has his own furniture business. It's called Remnant PDX, where he
Mhm.
picks and refurbishes and sells mid-century furniture. And him and his wife are like, amazing at it. And he does some stand-up on the side. So we're mostly telling jokes back and forth. And when we get together, we still skate together to this day.
That's cool. So where are you in Orlando still?
I'm in Dallas, Texas.
Oh,
So
cool. Okay.
after living in the same house for 20 years, I couldn't stop moving. I moved 9 times in 7 years,
Wow.
5 times cross country, plus a 6 month long skateboarding tour that I just sold everything I had. I hopped on a plane and it was vans and hotels for 6 months, and we probably drove across the country maybe 7 or 8 times during those months.
Wow, what a trip. So is your brother in Portland still?
Yeah, he's in Portland. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
How often do you get to see him each year?
I see him maybe once a year or slightly less than that. Maybe it's once every year and a half, or 2 years. And it's kind of funny whenever I see him in person, it doesn't feel any different to me. I don't know how he feels about it, but it's just kind of like, hey, bro, what's up? Because we talk so often. But it's interesting that we've lived apart far longer than we ever lived together.
Hmm.
And he moved away when I was 15. He went to college, and I was just purely on my own. And there was one 8 month stint where we lived together in the Bay Area between Orlando and going on that tour. And when I go visit him in Portland, sometimes I'll go with him to like move the furniture around or like visit a client or deliver something. And it just makes me think, had I followed him more than following my own path, how life would be different.
Yeah.
I mean, we may be partners in that business. Maybe we do something completely different. But it's always enjoyable when we get together in person, but still have no regrets of the adventure that I've had the opportunity to experience.
That's awesome. So in high school, you mentioned that you played football. Was that your favorite sport?
So it's definitely my favorite sport to watch now. I was actually an avid basketball player.
Okay.
For the people who know me, I'm only 5'5". So I like to think that may have benefited me, and I have no ACL injuries during my
Right.
days. But I excelled in soccer and basketball. In fact, I used to win this competition each year called the Elks Lodge Hoop Shoot.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, and you talk about life lessons. So I won it 3rd through 6th grade, and I get elementary school maybe isn't that impressive, of course, but I would win my school and then the district, and then at the county level, I'd always get 2nd or 3rd. I never got 1st place in that. But the first year, the principal, he didn't want anybody to practice. He did like for the first competition, he just wanted to surprise everybody. And coincidentally, my mom had worked for this principal many years ago. And so she knew how I worked. And he'd say, you know what? I'm just going to go out to the kids and pull them all to the side and say, hey, we're doing free throws. See how many out of 10 you can make. And so as a little teeny tiny 3rd grader, I came home and I said, Mom, I won the hoop shoot. She said, oh, John, how many did you make? I made 1 out of 10. I was the only one to make 1, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it turned out that our church pastor, he was formerly the high school basketball coach.
Oh, there you go.
And we had a basketball hoop on our on the front of our house and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And even though I was little, I could shoot really far because I put both arms and all my body into everything, and I could make 3-pointers and stuff,
Yeah.
And so my mom went to him and said, hey, John won this hoop shoot and he's got, the district one coming up. Would you be interested in help teaching him a few things? And he said, Elaine, which is my mom's name, I'd be happy to help him. But if I teach him, I'm going to teach him the right way. And he's not going to like it. And it's going to be hard. And he's going to feel like he's taking major steps back. But in the long term, it's going to help him. And so I went from being able to make 3-pointers with both arms and a full jump into it, right?
Right. The way I used to shoot, yeah.
Elbow in, right? This hand just supporting up and through and follow through and everything. And so I went from being able to make 3-pointers to barely being able to make it from right next to the hoop as a layup.
Right.
And
it's
also,
like being a foreign country, right? It's
it was terrible. And so and also physical pain because you're using muscles and ligaments that aren't used to being used. But I stuck with it, and the private high school before I had a much more positive view of it as a child, and they would let me into the gym after I got out of school, and I was able to practice in their gym.
Oh,
And
cool.
so, but over, the months and the weeks, I was able to build up those muscles, and I was able to make those shots, and I was able to, I think I made, I don't know, like 24 out of 25, I think was what I was doing in the competitions. But just such a great life lesson there too, that, if you have a long-term perspective, it's important to figure out how to do things the right way and the
Yeah.
proper way that will benefit the long term, rather than taking the shortcut and being found short later on.
And sometimes you have to go backwards to go forwards, right? I mean, it's kind of the way it works in life, you know? It was a good life lesson. That's cool. So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
Yeah, so my favorite subject was science, because I was just so fascinated with animals and stuff, but where I
Mhm.
really excelled was reading and writing. So I think I was on a 12th grade level at fourth grade sort of a thing. And so
Wow.
my mom was a teacher, and so, grades and everything was really important. In fact,
Yeah.
she taught fifth grade, and so in fifth grade, my brother and I would have to take on some of the class projects that her students did that we didn't do in ours, because they were important.
Yeah.
But I really
Go mom.
enjoyed poetry and just all sorts of different types of writing, and that has really benefited me in my work today, where I do a lot of posts and mostly short form content. But
Mhm.
I love alliteration, and I'd say I have affinity for alliteration, you could
Yeah.
say. But just that beat and that rhythm of putting words together and communicating something in a way that people understand and impacts them. So I still enjoy. I don't read quite as much as I would like. But I moved to some new apartments, and they have these beautiful pools. And so during this summer, Michael Crichton is my favorite author, but the downside is I've read every book he's written. And so I found a book that was similar to some of his, and just really enjoyed that. And I enjoy some business books, but there's something really to fiction that gives you a break from all the
Mhm.
work. I think it's important. I think it's important to hustle and grind, but I also think it's important to step away
Yeah.
and understand how your body uniquely works. Some
Yeah.
people can grind, some people can stay up till 4 a.m. or whatever. I need a break.
Yeah.
And so I do better work when I take time to step away, because then I can sprint during those times.
Yeah.
Um,
And you're more fresh when you come back.
100%,
Yeah.
exactly. But math was certainly not my strong suit. In fact, in sixth grade, I had, straight A's in elementary school, which isn't hard to do. I'm not bragging about it, but math was always an A I had to work for, where the
Mhm.
other ones just kind of came.
Mhm.
And but they had this test in sixth grade, and if you passed it, you got to skip sixth grade math and go to seventh, which is
Ooh.
a terrible idea, because math builds
Right.
on itself, right?
Right.
And so I went from, getting A's in math to a couple years later getting D's and F in
Jeez.
advanced math, and it just shook my confidence in
Yeah.
math since. So certainly not a math guy,
Yeah.
but uh, the literature, the reading, the writing is my jam.
Gotcha. In high school, did you have a favorite teacher? I mean, of course, mom, but
Yes, I did. Yeah, at the private high school, coincidentally, was my metal shop teacher.
ooh.
So I have the ability to work with my hands, but
Mhm.
no one ever really taught me how to do
Yeah.
stuff. So I don't, you know, I these projects, it's like if somebody could teach me a little, I could take it the rest of the way.
Mhm.
But in high school they had metal shop, and I was like, man, I'd love to do that. And so I started, and I just had a knack for welding.
Yeah.
And it turns out that my great uncle, who is my grandfather on my mom's side,
Mhm.
his brother, is one of the greatest metallurgists of all time.
Wow.
He was one of the head designers on this first space shuttle, and he actually held the patent for welding steel and copper together. His name,
Interesting.
yeah, his name is Dale Bonham, and
Mhm.
he lived in Mountain View, and they've got a massive airplane hangar right there. And even in his later life, when he was retired, if he needed any extra money, he would just go over to Moffett Field.
Mm-hmm.
They would get out of his way and he would weld as much money as he needed to get. And then you
Wow.
take that cash and you go back home. But so it just turned out that I had a knack for welding. And so the way that the curriculum was is they had all these welds you had to pass,
Mm-hmm.
right? You started out with oxyacetylene, and then you did some brazing, and then you do, the MIG welding, TIG
Mm-hmm.
welding, like all of these different ones.
Right.
And I just raced through these and passed all my welds super fast. And so the backup plan, if you got through the curriculum faster than expected, was you got to do any project you wanted.
Wow. How
And
cool.
so I just started welding rails and ramps for to skateboard in my
Right.
front driveway.
Might as well
And
do something practical, right?
yeah, and the guy who ran the teacher for Metal Shop, he also owned a bike shop in town. And so he
Oh,
kind of got it, like from the BMX skateboarding perspective. And
yeah.
I actually almost became a welder, and that's another story I could dive into, but I came this close to actually becoming a welder before
Yeah.
discovering business.
Wow, that's cool, man.
Yeah.
So you graduate high school. Where do you go from there?
So I went 30 minutes down the road to College of the Sequoias, COS, we called it, in Visalia, California. And my mom, being a teacher, she was like, "You're not taking breaks and you are starting, college immediately. And also you're taking, the great thing about college is you don't start your classes till noon,
Mm-hmm.
unless your mom's a teacher, and then you start them at 8, like you did the rest of your career,
Right.
But I was taking, these 3 different classes in community college, and I was working at a pizza place and everything there as well, but it was 30 minutes away. I had a 6-hour gap in between 2 of my classes.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like, what are you going to do? You're definitely not going to drive 30 minutes home and then back.
Right.
Yeah, you could go skate for a little bit on days that you want to, or the weather's nice. But my favorite thing to do was go hang out at the skate shop that I was sponsored by.
Hmm.
And so that was in the same town. And so I would just go skate and, friends with the employees. They had videos, they had magazines. It was just, my culture. And I always wanted to work there, but they would never hire any of the sponsored writers because of a conflict of interest,
Sure.
right? You got kicked off the team or you got fired, it affects the other. And so there was one day I rolled up there and they said, "John, we are so slammed. Would you mind going back to the skateboard wall and just helping people pick out skateboards?" And I was like, "Sure, I'm down to help,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I had no idea how much I knew about skateboarding products until I started selling them.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing about a skateboard and all of the associated products is the slightest details make a huge difference. So like
Mm-hmm.
the 1/8 of an inch on the width of a skateboard makes a
Mm-hmm.
huge difference. The board flips faster or slower based on, and there's different types of skating. If you want a more narrow board or a wider board, and then there's the concave of the board. There's the length of the nose and the tail, and then the trucks. There's different alloys of metal that some are lighter, and some don't grind as well, but they're better for tech skating because your board is lighter. Others for pools is like independent trucks, is a different alloy, but it grinds better. And there's
Mm-hmm.
different urethanes for the wheels, and so I'm just selling all these products, and I so fell in love with the process that the very next day I went to the college counselor's office and I changed all my classes from welding to business.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. It had an impact on you.
major impact. And then I proceeded to not do well in those classes because I would my focus was elsewhere,
Yeah.
and I was there for just a short time before I dropped out and pursued my skateboarding dreams.
So did you go back to school at all, or did you just basically go full on into skateboarding?
I did about 6 or 7 years later. I
Oh,
went back
okay.
to school and I started in my hometown in Reedley, and then I moved to Fresno, and then I went to university in Sacramento. And the way I ended up in Sacramento is kind of funny. I had forgotten how many credits I had because I didn't
Mm-hmm.
do a lot of general ed. I was just doing business classes, which
Right.
aren't general ed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found out late that I could transfer to university. And so I was like, "Oh man, let me put out, let me apply to everyone who's still accepting marketing students,
Right.
in California, it was all the UC system. So one thing about California colleges is they're affordable.
Yeah.
If you, it's maybe bankrupting the state, but it's good for the individual. And so, you know, it was like 2,000 per semester rather than like 30 grand or more for a year like you see from
Right.
some colleges,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It was far more affordable. Well, I applied everywhere, and then I got my letters back of who was accepting me. And then the next thing I did, because I'd lived all over the country and I've experienced all these different places, I knew that your biggest bill is your rent, right? Like your cell phone costs the same, your insurance doesn't vary much, right? Everything else is about the same, but your one biggest bill that varies greatly depending on where you live is your rent. So I just looked up the cost of living in every single one of these cities and chose the lowest. And I said, I guess I'm moving to Sacramento, even though I didn't know a soul there. But I went to Sacramento State and got my marketing degree. And I got such a better education for a few reasons. One was I was focused on what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I wasn't there because mom's kicking me out of the basement if I don't pass the classes, right? That was the first time around, right?
Right.
But I knew what I wanted to do. I removed myself from the workforce to go back to school, to be poor once again, and to gain this knowledge and obviously a degree so I could have this, you know, path back into the world.
And you were older and more mature, right? So, and you were focused, right? This was something you wanted to do. This was what you were gearing up, like you said, to go back into the workforce.
Absolutely. And, you know, I wasn't there just to like pass the test. I was there to gain the knowledge.
Yeah.
I remember actually in an advertising class one time, I had this professor who, she wasn't a great classroom teacher, but she was a great real world experience teacher. And so she had worked for some of these iconic advertising agencies like Leo Burnett and Saatchi and Saatchi. And so I'm just like, you know, soaking it all up. And I remember I sat next to these two girls in this class, slightly bratty. And they were, one said to the other one day, I remember she said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't learn one thing today. I can't believe I came to class," you know? And I remember thinking, lady, I learned 10 things. They're just not on the test.
Yeah.
You know, these are things later in life. And so the other thing too, in addition to, you know, being mature, more mature at least, and then being focused and wanting to learn the knowledge, I had a real life application to everything I was learning. So it's like, oh, when I managed the cell phone store, this is why they did this. When I was at the when I did telemarketing, this is why they did this. When I had this other job, they did this because of this reason. And so I had real life application as I'm learning these things to make things not just more interesting, but more tangible that I would take into my career.
So would you agree that when the student's ready, the teacher will appear?
Yeah, I think so. I mean,
Sounds
I
like
think
you got ready. You know what I mean?
I certainly got ready. But you know, I think also I've had the opportunity to teach a class at SMU. I had the opportunity to write a curriculum for business development and revenue strategies for their eSports business certificate. And that was a great honor to do that. And I taught it the first semester. But I think, yes, a lot of it is up to the students, but it's also something for the professor to really care and to relate to students and kind of meet them in the middle to where they're at and understand their life experience and their interests.
Totally agree.
How can they provide them not just with the checklist of the curriculum they've provided, but how can they give them tools that will benefit them far beyond the test in the classroom?
Gotcha. Okay, so if it's okay with you, is it okay if we go back just a bit? Because we sort of skipped over something, and I think and I know it's significant. Okay.
Anywhere, it's your show.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, bud. So I don't want to mess up the flow, though. You know what I mean?
Very good.
So you decided to go pursue your career in skateboarding, and you had mentioned that you moved, pardon me, to Orlando.
I did.
Talk about that process. So at some point you make this decision that you're going to turn pro and you're going to move to Orlando to pursue your pro career. Talk a little bit about the mindset, and was it what you expected? And then what was the single most important thing you learned during that 6 years of being a pro skater?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And one caveat too, because I hate to ever claim more than I really am. And so the term pro skater is different inside of skateboarding,
Yeah.
outside of skateboarding. So people
Yeah.
say, oh, you were pro because you got paid. Yes, I got paid to ride a skateboard and it was incredible and wonderful. But that might be the definition outside of skateboarding,
Yeah.
which is what I accomplished. But inside skateboarding, pro is a very specific definition.
Okay.
Means you had your own pro model skateboard. So a
Okay.
board company offered you a board and your name is on it and you have your signature products. So
Wow.
in that regard, that is not something I accomplished. I did have a company offer me that in my kind of mid-20s, but it it would it was not something I fully deserved. I wasn't at the level of the folks who have that honor, and so I'd rather turn that down than try to be something I'm not. But
I
to go
got
to
you.
your question about process, yeah. So I got sponsored when I was 14, and your first sponsor is your skate shop sponsor.
Right.
And once you get that one, if you're doing your duties and everybody like really likes you and appreciates what you're doing for the brand, it's kind of like a snowball rolling downhill
Okay.
because you have local reps of all these different companies and they're saying, who's the best skater in town? Who should we hook up?
Right.
Marketing through skateboarding is really influencer marketing before influencer marketing was a popular term.
Right.
We all look at our favorite skater and we want to look at it like them and we want to
Yeah.
skate like them. So if you skate for this shoe company or you have this signature shoes or signature board, I want to buy that because I want to be like you because you're my favorite, right? And so I gained, I think in high school, I probably had 7 or 8 different sponsors at one point.
Okay.
So it was pretty cool. I do demos and shoot videos and photos and stuff like that. Well, when I graduated in high school, it was kind of this aha moment or a pivot in the road of I got to do something with my life, right? And I thought for the first time I was like, "Oh my goodness, am I just going to skateboard for fun? That sounds terrible." But what went through my mind, when I signed up for all these welding classes, I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to have to get a job and I'm going to just like skate for fun." And it was kind of like reality really smacked me in the face.
Yeah.
Well, my skate shop, this was, so to date myself, I'm 41 years old now. And so this was like right before MySpace started. So right before social media started to take off.
Right.
Well, my skate shop got in the mail a flyer, and it was a contest from this skateboard company in Orlando. And they said, send in your sponsor me tapes. So back in the day, you would make a tape that's, 4 to 5 minutes long, edited to music, and you'd send it out to sponsors. In fact, I still have the first one I ever sent out with the letter I would send out, which is kind of fun to look back on and a bit nostalgic and hilarious all at the same time. But they said, the winner of this contest will get sponsored by our company and be an AM. So an AM is right below pro. So AM is everything a pro gets minus the signature model.
Gotcha.
The royalties that come from that. Well, I don't know if I was the only one who submitted or if millions did, but Mike, I won that contest.
Wow, that's cool, man. That's cool.
Yeah, and so what it did was having a board sponsor. So in that world, and back then almost nobody was really sponsored. So it was kind of nowadays a lot of just kind of everybody sponsored. But it was kind of a new thing for everybody. But it's one thing to have a skate shop sponsor. It's something to have like local sponsors, but your board, it's a tough one to get. And it's really, a level of achievement. And so it reignited this fire in me. And I said, oh my goodness, this is possible. I can do something with this. And so I was doing all these demos out in California and shooting photos and videos and sending them to them. But at some point they said, John, the whole team is out here in Orlando. You could do way more with us if you would move out here. And I was like, yeah, that sounds like the move, And so my mother, in her wisdom and her focus on education, said, John, you should get your AA degree so you have something to fall back on a little bit. And so I stayed in school a little bit longer, but I wasn't passing class. I was failing them because my focus is on skateboarding and these other things. And one day my mom was just like, John, you should just move. And I said, yes, I'm going to do that. Well, the wrinkle of this whole story is 3 weeks before I moved, the company fell apart.
Oh,
The two owners had this bitter fight and split.
oh no.
And if there is one thing that is a pet peeve that I have, it's when people say they're going to do something
Yeah.
and they don't do it.
Yeah.
I have all these
Bothers me
friends,
too.
yeah, I have all these friends growing up in Central Valley, like, oh, I'm going to move to the mountain to Mammoth, and I'm going to be a snowboard instructor, and I'm going to do all this cool stuff. And it sounds cool, and maybe you even really think you're going to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I just remember thinking while people are telling these stories, I'm like, I guarantee you're not going to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds cool, but that's not happening. And I don't want to be that guy. So I was like, I am not going to be hanging around Reedley, California, and people are going to see me like, John, I thought you moved to Orlando. I'm going to say, oh, it didn't work out.
Yeah.
Never. So I always say if I write an autobiography one day, it'll probably be called I'm Going Anyway.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I'm going anyway. And there's been so many times when the stars have not been aligned.
Mm-hmm.
But I saw opportunity and I just went for it. And so
Yeah.
I bought a one-way ticket to Orlando. And it's funny to think, this was nowadays, if you know someone's name, you could Google it or look it up on social media. You can see what someone looks like, right? Well, this was pre-social media. And so
Sure.
I actually had never even seen a picture of the guy I was moving in with.
Wow.
And I said, man, how am I going to know it's you? He said, I'll be wearing our t-shirt. And so I just bought a one-way ticket, just jumped in the deep end and went, and showed up in Orlando and began that adventure. And it was quite an adventure.
So what's the single most important thing you learned during that 6 years?
The thing that I learned, I learned a number of things. And so I'll give you kind of a few of them.
Sure, that's fine.
Number one, in Orlando, so I grew up around orchards and farms and factories. So nobody I knew was really in business or entrepreneurial. No one in my family, none of my friend groups. And so I remember there was this one time I wanted to get some t-shirts printed. And Nino, this guy who I was living with, who owned the company, was like, Nino, we should get these t-shirts printed. I want to find a place. Do you know of a place that prints them? He's like, John, what you should really do is you should buy a screen printer and then make your own shirts. And then you can start a business with all of the schools and the local businesses around to make all their shirts for them. And that was the most foreign thought I had ever had in my life. I was like, bro, I'm trying to get like 10 t-shirts. I'm not trying to start a business. And so at that point, I didn't really grasp the full lesson. And I did not buy a screen printer and do all those things. It was the first time my mind was sparked to entrepreneurship. The other thing I learned, because sometimes I did have to.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.